Welcome to Curious Life of a Childfree Woman, a podcast celebrating unconventional choices and asking curious questions through the lens of a happy, child-free life. Every week, I chat with experts on today's most interesting topics, inspiring us to think differently, live intentionally, and find fulfillment on our terms. Whether you're child-free or seeking a space where parenthood isn't part of the conversation, you are welcome here. It's not about comparison, it's about possibility. Let's get curious together. We constantly hear that we should eat well for our health and longevity. But what does eating well even mean? And when we think about genetics and exercise and the environment and everything else we think about related to our health, how impactful is the nuance of nutrition? These are the questions that I have been curious about lately, and I am thrilled to have a guest today who is the perfect person to help us. Laura Pensiero is a chef, nutritionist, and culinary consultant. She spent decades blending culinary artistry with nutrition science, helping people embrace food as a tool for wellness without overwhelm, restriction, or diet culture nonsense. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. So let's dive into this idea of eating well in a world that feels like it's obsessed with trends and there's always something new that we're hearing about from keto to whole 30, whole foods, organic. Like there's all this stuff out there. It's confusing for the average consumer that isn't a chef and nutritionist. So, can you start by telling us from your perspective, what does it mean to eat well?
I think if you look at what the baseline recommendations are, they haven't really changed that much. But as you know, Emily, the diet business is big business. And a lot of these healthy eating styles out there are very similar. So, for example, if you take the Mediterranean diet, which is rated again for the eighth year in a row by US News and World Report as the best of the diets for health reasons, for sustainability, for long term effects and prevention of disease. The Mediterranean diet is very similar to the DASH diet, the diet to stop hypertension, which is similar to the MIND diet, which is a combination of both of them. So we have different labels that we put on diets, but the baseline, what we should be doing, is very similar. I think we just have to cut through the noise and help people understand what might be right for them. For example, all of them recommend more fruits and vegetables, whole grains, less red meats, healthy fish, like omega-3 rich fish, nuts and seeds. It's a lot of the same with different labels and then maybe some specific foods. For example, if you're going to follow the MIND diet, which is supposed to stop neurodegeneration, so it's really the Mediterranean mixed with DASH, and then you add some foods that are specifically helpful to like neurohealth, for example, berries or dark leafy greens. So I think if we all follow what is tried and true, and then we personalize it a little bit with the foods we can add. And I do like that whole premise. Like, let's add good foods. Let's not talk about all the things that we cannot have. Let's focus on nourishing our body, our gut, our health with the foods that are going to sustain us and get us to our actual goals. If we look at it the other way, it really does feel like deprivation and restriction and all those things that make it not sustainable.
I love the idea of adding things in instead of taking things away. And the Mediterranean diet, I've heard about this a lot in relation to overall health, but also in relation to longevity. I'm sure you're familiar with that Blue Zone book or concept. Do you know that guy I'm talking about who's studied these areas of the world where people live the longest?
Yeah, the epidemiological studies that show how diet will affect longevity. And it's interesting, part of that too is calorie restriction. Calories are metabolized, metabolism is aging. So it makes sense that people that don't eat as many calories actually have longer lifespans. It's one of those fascinating things. Obviously, it's the foods we eat, but it's also overeating because everything we eat is metabolism. Aging is metabolism.
You're blowing my mind right now. I mean, and like it makes sense, we know that okay, if we generalize and say that there's overeating in relation to obesity. We know that obesity as a disease shortens lifespan for a variety of different reasons and the different diseases that that causes with increased rate of cancer and hypertension and all of these other things. But I've never heard somebody talk about this. Like if we think about metabolism as a process that's happening in our body that is aging, are you saying that eating less, kind of pushing our body through that process less?
I'm not suggesting anybody starve or, severely restrict calories, but if you think of it, when we undergo the process of metabolizing, whether it's drugs we take into our system, we have to metabolize those drugs. If it's foods or alcohol or whatever it is, we have to metabolize it. That is a process of oxidation. And that's like, when we think about that, we want to eat high antioxidant foods and we want healthy oxidation in our body. We don't want extreme oxidation going on.
Okay, so how do we do that? Like, tell me more. I know that you have a Mediterranean restaurant, correct?
That's right. Yes.
Amazing. So tell us more, like, what is the Mediterranean diet? Or if somebody is trying to follow that as a nutrition guideline, what does that look like?
It looks like a lot of healthy fruits and vegetables, more vegetables actually than fruit. But in addition to that, whole grains, nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds are one of the few places you can get really good quality vitamin E. So that's really great. Fish a few times a week. I think red meat once or twice a month is the style of the Mediterranean. Wine in moderation. And it was pretty much a healthy fatty fish.
And what is some of the science? You mentioned oxidation. And so maybe it's a combination of science of processes in our body. I don't know. Or just like specific nutrients or vitamins that are in those foods. Like, what is it about those specific things that are good for us?
Oh, there's just so much. I wrote a book. In my career, one of the most exciting times was when we started discovering phytochemicals and their potential. It really brought home food is medicine. Prior to the whole advent of phytochemicals and just discovering all these hidden things that aren't vitamins or minerals, but they're substances in food that truly make food as medicine. Because we're not looking at deficiency levels. We're looking at things that we can't even really measure in terms of what is like. We have the RDAs for vitamins and minerals, and we know how much we should take to prevent disease. We're not quite there on like how much should we take for optimum health. That's a big part of studies. But with phytochemicals, it just opened up this Pandora's box of thousands and thousands of compounds in food, the unknowns that have very relevant interactions in our body. And some of them may be synergistic too. So when people are saying, well, they've isolated lycopene in tomatoes, and maybe I could just take lycopene to prevent macular degeneration. May be true, but it hasn't been proven to be true. Lycopene may work in synergy with a lot of other carotenoids that you find in foods. So it just opened up this whole area of food as medicine that I think is extraordinarily exciting because we don't even know completely what's out there. And we do know that fresh whole foods have these interactions in our body that help lower oxidative stress, that help prevent inflammation, that keep our gut healthy. And our gut is our barrier to infection, disease. Over the last few years, you've heard a lot of information about gut health. And lately been called the second brain of the human body because from our sleep to our mood to depression, anxiety to health to infection to inflammation, a healthy gut is like your first layer, your barrier. It helps. A healthy gut will absorb more nutrients. A healthy gut will leak more bad things into your bloodstream too. So it's one of the really interesting areas has taken on, I think, a very positive role because if you think about keeping your gut happy, thinking about the food you're putting into your body and how am I going to keep my gut happy, which is, I think, if it's going to lead to all these good things, and it really does. I mean, if you're going to sleep better, if you're going to have more energy, those are things that are tangible, like what it does in a long term sense, in terms of disease prevention. That's something that's hard to measure, but how you feel is something that's pretty measurable to you and will keep you kind of invested in taking steps to do things that are good for you.
We do need those tangible outcomes. There's so much temptation, right? Even if we think, okay, I want to eat healthy. I want to be a healthy person. It's like you wake up in the morning and you're feeling sluggish. You have a huge cup of coffee. Oh, a muffin sounds really good. Is a muffin really that good for me? Probably not, but I want it. It's like we need tangible consequences, that kind of happen day over day, not just like, yes, it's important to me. I want to live long, but hopefully that's still a long ways off. But to your point, if it's like, I will not sleep well tonight, or I will feel super bloated after lunch, or, something that is happening in the moment, it's a little bit more motivating to like stop and think through those decisions differently.
Yeah, I really encourage people to give themselves a week of just changing their patterns. And then don't look at the scale and don't be focused on that. Focus on, how do I feel after a week of doing this? If you're sleeping better, if you have more energy, just feel like, hey, I'm in a really good mood today, and, a lot more positive than I've been feeling lately. Then take those cues, because if your goal is weight loss, that will come down the road. I just don't like really the focus unless you really have to. And if it's like clinically determined that you need to lose weight and it's really like a big component of your health picture, then obviously that should be forefront for you. But for most of us that want to maintain or attain a healthier weight, if you focus on the good things that you're doing for yourself and the way that you're feeling on a day to day basis, the weight thing will come. But when you put it front and center, it's just much more laborious to achieve what you're looking for.
It's not fun. Like, stripping things out and, like, white knuckling to not eat the muffin is miserable, It's just so unfun, and then you feel like, "Whatever, I deserve it, I'm having it." So, I like that flip of things, and when we talk about, like, those choices, like doing, as you said, let's start for a week and see what makes us feel better emotionally and physically, like, all the parts of us. It's eating those whole foods, fruits and vegetables, right? Lean protein, less red meat, less alcohol, like those types of choices are what you're talking about?
And, stage things in one at a time. It's really difficult, I think, to do everything all at once. So maybe in the first week to say, you know what, I'm going to eat more vegetables. I'm going to replace this with a salad, just those little things. And then each week, add in another goal. If you do that, it just doesn't feel like, actually, it's like, oh, I'm doing really well with this. Now I'm going to add another layer to this. And I think that really is more helpful than trying to do everything perfect.
Yeah, that never works.
No. And I think the primary thing is getting people to eat more vegetables. That's going to take care of a lot of issues because one, you're going to displace a lot of foods that maybe you need to replace in your diet. You only have so much room and, on your plate or in your repertoire for the whole day. So if your focus is getting more vegetables, without even thinking about it, you're going to be replacing some foods that probably need to go in your diet. So I just look for the goal, not for the restriction.
Love it. Okay, let's talk about the gut microbiome as part of this because I agree with you, it's out there more and more, but I still don't think we really get it, or I don't. Like, we hear that it's really important that you have a healthy gut microbiome. I feel like prebiotics, probiotics are everywhere. You see a soda on the shelf and it says, buy this, it has probiotics. I even saw like a face moisturizer that had prebiotics, and I thought, is this connected? Like, are things going from my face skin into my gut? Have we gone too far with marketing? So, can you just explain what is the gut microbiome?
It's a whole environment culture within your gut that is basically an environment, and it's made up of tens of thousands of different types of organisms that are beneficial. Now, when you don't have a healthy gut, you still have gut flora there, you still have these microbiota, but they're maybe not exactly the type you wanna have. Things like alcohol. If you're drinking a lot of alcohol, you're killing off a lot of good gut flora. If you're eating, like, a lot of high fiber foods, fiber is a prebiotic, meaning that it's not actually like a probiotic where it's actually a live culture. So if you're eating a lot of prebiotic, high fiber foods, those foods are, like, fermented, digested in your gut, and they are food for good bacteria. So then by virtue of eating something like that, you're crowding out bad bacteria, basically nourishing good bacteria in your gut. So there's all different ways. I mean, you can take probiotics, but think about it. We're talking about tens of thousands of organisms that are helping you. You can't put them into one pill. I'm not against a probiotic, especially, if you're on antibiotics. Sure, eat yogurt, take a probiotic, but you're never going to make up for a good diet and the different varieties and thousands of them that you could have in your gut just by supporting it with a healthy diet.
That makes sense. I mean, tempting to think, oh, I'll buy a pill and then I can kind of eat whatever I want, which is just not the way that it works. But the good bacteria that we want to foster or kind of fuel with these healthy, fiber rich whole foods, why is having good bacteria in our gut so important? What does that do to the other systems in our body that matters?
It helps with metabolism, absorption of nutrients. Also, it creates a barrier to, some people call it like a leaky gut. A leaky gut is a gut that bad bacteria can seep through the gut wall into your bloodstream because it doesn't have enough of a healthy gut barrier. You want to talk about inflammation and
Yes.
infection and, just kind of chronic fatigue. That's part of the whole equation.
Whoa. Okay. I've heard that term leaky gut, but I didn't really understand that either. So basically, if you don't have a healthy environment that is kind of keeping bad bacteria infection, a barrier, if it's not keeping that contained, then things get into your bloodstream and cause infection, disease. Is that what we're talking about?
Or just generally inflammation, because the things that aren't meant to leak, should not be coming through your gut wall. You got to look at it like you got a little army of healthy bacteria that are just trying to absorb nutrients and, you know, metabolize your food and take everything good out of food and make sure that it's utilized properly. And if you don't have all the right components in there, then you're not getting the full value of your food.
Okay. And how stagnant is this? Let's say somebody is listening and they're like, oh my gosh, okay, I've been eating a ton of processed stuff. I drink, whatever. And they're like, oh my gosh, I need to fix this. How long does that take? Like, if we start injecting more vegetables and whole grains and healthy fish, does it take like a week to repair it? Do we need to eat really well for a year? Like, how do things get better?
I don't think it would take a year. I don't really have an answer for like the specific timeline of that, but I think, in a week, you could start feeling better. You're not gonna feel better overnight. "Oh, I switched my diet today and, I expect this tomorrow." But certainly over a month, you should start feeling very different.
That's not so bad.
The only way you could really know, honestly, Emily, is if you took, like, a gut biopsy. Then you could see, like, what your gut flora looks like. That's the only definitive way. So it's really how you feel. That's a little bit subjective.
Okay. You said inflammation, and this is something that I'm, I guess, worried about. Like, I hear this word and I hear that inflammation is sort of, I don't know if it's necessarily the root cause or it's kind of setting up the right environment for disease to happen, even cancer, some of them, Alzheimer's, like these extremely serious diseases being connected to inflammation. What is that? If somebody says inflammation, what does that mean actually like happening in our body?
Well, you can understand, like, if you burn yourself, you get inflamed. It's a reaction. It's a reaction to all sorts of things, but, like, inflammation is a state where you're producing a lot of cortisol and antibodies, and your body's working really hard when you're in an inflamed state. And a lot of people undergo chronic inflammation because of their diet, because of the stress in their life, because of lack of sleep. There's all sorts of factors that go into it. Diet can help a lot. Inflammation is associated with a lot of chronic diseases, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, increased risk of stroke, many types of cancer. So there's a reason we're all kind of worried about it because it underlying variable in the causation of all of these symptoms and syndromes. It's something that's also generally preventable, and that's what the power of nutrition is. Like, if you can, like, tamp down, it's never, you need some healthy inflammation in your body. That's the way our body reacts to, like, even foreign bodies or substances. What we don't want is hyperinflammation and at a chronic, steady level. We want to make sure we have a healthy level that helps ward off infections, foreign bodies, all of that. But we don't want to be in a chronic state of inflammation.
Okay, that makes sense. That's super helpful to me. And maybe this is like a repetitive question, but I always love to walk away with like, what do I buy at the grocery store next? Like tangible things. So if I want to be anti-inflammatory with my diet, understanding that it's not all diet, like you mentioned, sleep and stress and other things like that that play a role. But thinking about food specifically, like, does this go back to the kind of Mediterranean diet as one way to label that way of eating? Like, are there kind of anti-inflammatory foods that work for everybody? Or does this get more personalized where like something that's causes inflammation for you doesn't cause inflammation for me? Like, where does that fall on the spectrum?
There is, like, definitely a general list of, like, anti-inflammatory foods, and it is all consistent with the Mediterranean diet or say the Mind diet or Dash diet. It all goes hand in hand. In terms of specific foods, yes, certainly dark berries, dark leafy greens, bright orange vegetables, anything that's high in antioxidants. If it's high in antioxidants and it's really bright in color, that's usually a good sign that it has a lot of really protective phytochemicals in it that will also do their job in mitigating inflammation. So there's just general rules of thumb like that. But alcohol, like, it's also to talk about one thing, certainly is very causative to inflammation. So, you know, even in the Mediterranean diet, moderate drinking is not encouraged, but certainly it's part of the plan, if you will. You think of the Mediterranean, a glass of wine is not shunned at all, but alcohol in excess is really causative of inflammation and also poor gut health. They go hand in hand.
Yeah, you said earlier that alcohol, high consumption is that kills good bacteria in our gut.
Yeah, definitely does. It's a toxin to gut flora. So it doesn't mean you should never have it, but it's just moderation, like everything, and also putting in a lot of good foods that help create the opposite, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, 2025, it feels like the year that there's just no good news about alcohol. Not that there ever has been, like, it's not a shock. I don't think we've been sitting around thinking that alcohol is in any way additive good for our health, but there's definitely some definitive stuff out there in a big way that it's really bad. Like, okay, we know it's bad for our liver, right? Like, that news has been available, but when you connect it to inflammation and kind of wrecking your gut health, these things that we're hearing about in other contexts, I think it gives it more meaning and more of that kind of tangible why that we talked about at the beginning to really look at our consumption seriously if it's doing all of these horrible things.
Yeah, look, I run a Mediterranean restaurant, and I certainly enjoy watching people have a good time, enjoying a great glass of wine with their meal. I think your body tells you too when you're overdoing something. Just listen.
It really does.
I actually switched. I used to be more of a less regional Italian restaurant. And then in 2009, I wrote Hudson Valley Mediterranean. It was sort of a homage to all the farmers and people in the area and just like using local ingredients to create Mediterranean food. And then I really switched. I said, this really makes sense with my health background that I should go in a direction. I'm a registered dietitian and a chef. And people always are, is it a healthy restaurant? I'm like, no, it's Mediterranean. So it is innately healthy, which is great because I don't want to make up healthy food. I want to serve healthy food.
I love that. Yeah, it's not about inventing some low calorie whatever that people might equate in their mind, like a health food restaurant. It's just serving food that's naturally great for us and delicious.
So yeah, and the Mediterranean is a lot of fun too because you can cross borders from Italy to Spain to Greece to Turkey, North Africa, and Middle East. And I think that's what really is intriguing to people as they embark on a new eating plan. Mediterranean will support you in terms of variety because there's just so many different flavors and directions you can go in. You'll never be bored.
Good. We need that. We need variety. And if we can have variety of all things that are good, that really helps to kind of stick to a journey. One thing we haven't talked about that I think about a lot is sugar. Sugar is my number one vice, like cookies, candy, Oreos, which I just saw something on Instagram where they basically, it's like Oreos are flame retardant or something. Like that's how human made the ingredients in Oreos are. So, that gives me pause. But sugar is delicious and it's a huge part of the American diet. We know that it's kind of snuck into things that aren't even necessarily sweets, like condiments and sauces and all this stuff. So, what role does sugar play, if at all, in the Mediterranean diet? And what's your take on sugar?
I'm totally against like high fructose corn syrup and all those added sugars that you get because they sneak up on you. Like you may get it from a granola bar. At the end of the day, you don't know it's in all these different food sources and then you end up having a lot of it. I don't mind sugar where it enhances a dish and I prefer it in its natural form. So not like man-made sugar syrup with, chemical structure. That to me is where, like, I think Americans are going wrong. Having, like, a baked good here and there, there's nothing wrong with that. Putting a teaspoon of sugar, no big deal. It's the amount of sugar we get that is added in all the ultra processed foods that we're eating. When you're eating something that's ultra processed, you're also not just getting the sugar, you're getting all those fake fats, the seed oils, the hydrogenated fat, and the sugar. And that together is like a trifecta for a problem. I don't necessarily think this sugar in and of itself, it's just the level it plays in your diet and the type of sugar that you're eating. Because really, what are you getting from high sugar foods in terms of nutrients? Usually not much. Usually sugars go with refined carbohydrates and fake fat. But I don't think, having a couple cookies here or there. I serve desserts at my restaurant. They're very good. But people usually share them or it's an indulgence. They're going out. They want to enjoy themselves.
So back to the idea of moderation over cutting it out completely, more just being mindful even about the type of sugar you consume versus having something that's just fake on fake on fake, having a nice quality dessert at a restaurant or that you make yourself and you know kind of exactly what goes into it versus stuff that's like these artificial chemical creations.
Yes, I remember when I used to do nutrition counseling early in my career, and you'd sit down with someone, you do a diet recall, and ask them really try and tease out everything they're doing to get to what the root of the problem is and like where they're not meeting their goals. And it would take a lot of probing. You have to be almost like a psychologist to get to the real heart of the matter. But as I'd look through things, the last question would always be about beverages and the amount of the beverages. And I have to say, there are clients that I had worked with that 2,000 calories a day in just sugary beverages. It's like, before you do anything else, that's the only thing you have to focus on because right now you will lose 3/4 of a pound a week just by taking that out of your diet. And people don't really count that. Like, it's like, well, I'm just having something to drink. But first of all, the level of sugar and the level of calories, that makes up a predominant amount of calories in some people's diets. And what aren't you getting if that is your primary calorie substrate?
Right. It's so scary. Like, none of us are doing it on purpose, right? And to your point, you have to really, really dig to even get people to face, like, well, what is the stuff that's kind of holding us back nutritionally or keeping us feeling sluggish or bloated or all these things that we complain about? You really have to pay so close attention. It feels like there's a lot of responsibility on the consumer, thinking like just in the grocery store, to figure out like what's really in this stuff.
But it does get easier. Like, it may be a lot of focus up front, but it does become more part of your normal routine. I think we invest a lot of time and energy in other things. If we just give it some attention for a while, it does get easier and it doesn't become another job. You just get into different habits, but that doesn't happen until you get repetitive. It is a little work up front, but it's not a lifetime of work to eat healthy.
Well said. And to your point, we feel better. So then you want to keep doing it. Like once you kind of get in that routine, it's like, okay, wow, I feel a lot more energized or, all these positive things start to change. So it helps you stick with it.
And your cravings change too. You'll notice that if you do this for a while, if you just really embark on a healthier path, things that are really sugary will taste really twice as sugary. Sugar isn't a regular part of your diet, it's an indulgence. All of a sudden, your acuity for something like sugar or salt will change. And that's basically your body is readapted to the way that you've adjusted to eat.
Why does that happen? I've heard that before. I've never given up sugar long enough to experience it, but this is my time. This is my time. I want to seriously cut back on sugar. I know that I'm at a unhealthy level. So how does that work? Like over time, your brain wants it less because it's had it less. Like what's going on?
Actually, I don't know the metabolic pathway for that. My guess would be it's some sort of sensory receptors. And also, yeah, I think there must be like a brain relationship to it, like, in terms of your acuity. Like, I personally, I don't cook with a lot of salt. At the restaurant, I have to cook at a certain level just because the threshold of other people may not be mine. But my sensitivity to it is pretty acute because I just don't use it that much. So it's one of those things that I don't know actually what the cause and effect is.
Okay, well, I'm gonna try it and see if I become one of those people that thinks like a strawberry is really sweet or an almond or something that I hear.
Maybe not an almond, but like a strawberry, like fruit, like when you don't eat a lot of sugar, fruit tastes a lot sweeter.
I'll look forward to that. I need to come to your restaurant. I will do that when I am in New York. And anybody listening in the New York area, please, please go to Laura's restaurant. You'll see the name and all of her information in the show notes. But for most of us, most of our meals, we are cooking at home. And I think sometimes this combination of, convenience and time shortage, and maybe we don't all have amazing chef skills to bring a dish to life at home, so then we start to kind of buy more packaged things, but then maybe that's not good. Like, how can you help us kind of improve what we're doing on the day to day in our homes when it comes to cooking and nutrition?
Absolutely. So I just finished an article on processed foods, and all processed foods aren't bad. We're hearing a lot about minimally processed, processed, and ultra processed. Ultra processed is where we want to stay away from. Basically, those aren't foods that have ingredients that you would cook in your kitchen. Five or more ingredients, something like flavored potato chips or, a lot of frozen prepared meals. If you recognize them and they're all whole foods, that's one thing, but chances are there's a lot of ingredients in there that you would never find to cook in your own kitchen with. And I think that's a real tell all right there. But processed foods, like processed just means it's altered for either safety or usability. Think of canning, drying, so dried fruit, for example, milling flours. That's all processing. So I think it's very important to be very distinctive about, oh, I don't eat processed food. We all eat processed food. It's just the level of processing and how healthy those foods are. So what I like to do is have a pantry at home that has just all these staples. So if I just need to put together a quick meal, I can do it. You know, supply you with some tips of like what a great pantry would look like, but some chili paste in case you want to make a quick curry, some canned beans, some dried beans, whole grains, pastas, just some items that like, if you want to just kind of go through your refrigerator, root through your pantry and put together a quick meal, you have something on hand. Just the other day, I made a shrimp curry at home and I just had frozen shrimp in my freezer. Some of those tubes, you ever see those tubes of condiments like lemongrass? They sell them in the refrigerated section of, say, the produce department. So cilantro, lemongrass, lemon zest, garlic. It's really hard to have all the ingredients you need on hand if you just want to prepare a dish that's kind of a little bit out of the ordinary. So just have tubes of like herbs and seasonings in your refrigerator, and you can make something that seems quite exotic, like pretty impromptu. So I like doing that. I like having a lot of frozen fruits in case I don't have any fresh fruits on hand, frozen vegetables, one ingredient, whatever it is, spinach. I think just like thinking ahead a little bit and having some of those convenience foods. Sometimes I buy, like I can chop an onion, but like if I'm in a rush, sometimes I'll buy in the produce department the chopped onion, celery, peppers, butternut squash, just because maybe I'm rushing. I just want to do that. At the restaurant, I'll, fabricate whatever I need from scratch, but it helps, especially if you're busy and you just want to throw together a good meal, a quick soup. If you have all those vegetables cut that you can buy pre-cut, just add some seasonings. You can even buy the pulled turkey or chicken. So you can make a quick chicken or turkey soup with a lot of vegetables in it. If you don't have fresh vegetables, how about some frozen cauliflower? Throw that in there. I just think it's planning ahead a little bit and having the ingredients on hand can help you do it more often. And I double everything I cook because I'm one of those people. I'll have soup for breakfast. So if I make a healthy soup, I'll just make an egg and put it in my soup and do an egg drop soup in the morning. And so I'm getting vegetables, I'm getting some protein, and I'm off to a good start. And then you just have whatever works for you. You just need to set yourself up for success in that way. I used to teach actually nutrition via cooking at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And that was great, being with people that were high risk for cancer or had recovered from cancer. So a very attentive audience. And the way we did it was I would teach cooking through ingredients because I feel if you know how to work with harvest squash, your recipes become yours. They're not my recipes. If you know how to peel, seed, and get to like the healthy stuff, then you have like thousands of recipes at your hand. So I would always take it from technique on seasonal ingredients to help people become their own chef at home. And I think we're all not going to follow somebody's recipes all the time. We need to be empowered on how do we work with fresh whole ingredients. and get more confident in that way.
That must have been really interesting and rewarding work to work with patients like that who really are interested, as you said, very attentive, and you're at a whole new level, heightened awareness of your body and what you're putting in your body and what that means. That sounds really interesting.
It was great, and a lot of supportive family members too that wanted to learn. So obviously, they were pushed into a level where they felt like this was essential for them, but we should all look at it that way. We should look at it like there's a lot we can do to put ourselves on a better, happier, healthier path, and we can really enjoy it too. Cooking is nourishing. When people come to my house, they say, "Oh, you've been cooking all week. You must not." No, I love cooking for you. It's part of sharing, and it doesn't have to be difficult.
I love the simple tips. This is like my journey to eat less sugar. I also want to be on a journey to enjoy cooking more. Because I don't. I cook for myself a lot, but historically, like, I've never been a person that's like, "Oh, it's so relaxing to cook." I find it stressful, but I think it's because I'm not necessarily set up for success with the things that I'm buying, and, I do it under the wrong time, like, I wait until I'm starving, and then I have to make something for dinner, and it's like, these are things that are in my control. I could take a little bit more effort to be thoughtful about enjoying the time that I'm in the kitchen and enjoying what I'm making on the other side.
Put on some good music and just enjoy that time, a little bit of time away from the screen, from your phone, listen to some good music and make more than, you might eat. Like if I really love a recipe and I double it up, I only live here with my husband. So my general manager at the restaurant, I feed him probably 4 times a week. I'm bringing him in quarts of soup and pasta and everything else that I'm cooking at home. And he's like, "Laura, I'm working here." It's got Chinese food.
I bet your team and your friends love you because, yeah, you're sharing the love of your amazing talent.
Well, it's nice also to people always appreciate a gift of food too. So even if you're going to cook more than you need, give it to someone. They probably need a healthy meal too.
Yes, absolutely. This idea of enjoying the process of eating, enjoying the process of cooking, that feels to me like it's part of the Mediterranean lifestyle and, just gathering and finding pleasure around food. What's your philosophy as a chef and also just as an individual and some of those tips you just gave us about kind of making the most out of the cooking process? What's your philosophy around that?
I think it's everything because I was trained as a nutritionist and then I went to culinary school. I worked with chefs in New York City. My first husband was a chef, and we went back to his hometown in Italy and reopened his family trattoria. That year
Wow.
I spent there, I learned more about food and the process of eating, I would say, than all the education I had had prior. And also, like when I went to the French Culinary Institute in New York, all the French chef instructors, they pretty much ate whatever they wanted to. Even if it was an ounce of chocolate, it was all good, healthy food, whole foods. And I learned to eat by going to Italy every single year and usually to a different region and just getting into the lifestyle of how they were eating, the tempo, the not rushing, the conversations. I know we can't do that all the time here, but we should have some meals where it's more about conscious eating and the company that we're surrounded by and really being very appreciative of what we're eating. Like every time I go to Italy, when I'm eating at a restaurant, my next thought as I'm enjoying that food is where am I going tonight? And I always manage to lose weight. They're so food centric, but they're about quality. The quality of their food is everything. And I know you're probably hearing a lot about Maha and what's going on with that. I am very excited for the food portion of the Maha platform because this is a conversation we've needed to have for a very long time, especially just having lived in Europe and having run a restaurant there. The fact that we have so many foods that they will not take because of what we put in our food, it's subjective, but I know myself and a lot of people that travel a lot tell me I can eat pasta in Italy. I can't eat pasta here. There's absolutely a better attention to the quality of food and the regulation of what they'll allow into their consumer markets in Europe than there is here. And we have to demand better food because it's making Americans sick, the quality of our food and the convenience foods. It's not that things shouldn't be convenient, but ingredients that are not allowed in many other countries should not be in our food.
Definitely. I'm glad you brought this up. I was just talking with a friend about this over the weekend, and it's scary to hear these things and to know, I mean, this is the reality, right? That other countries wouldn't even allow some of the things that we are sometimes eating every single day in, day out, depending on how conscious you are of the ultra processed food and just even the chemicals that are in things that we would think would be healthy, and we're just not expecting them to be there. From your perspective, like for the average American consumer, like what do we do about this? Is it, I mean, on the one hand, I guess taking responsibility and paying attention, like you said, if you're buying frozen spinach, look at the label and make sure you buy one that just has spinach in it, right? And doesn't have all these additives. So we can do that when we're in person at the store. What else can we do? Like kind of power of the people to try to make this better. It feels like a really serious problem.
I think as the American public gets more enlightened about what is actually in their food, they have to shift away from these foods. The food companies are going to go to where there's profit, obviously. And I don't know how much all of this can be regulated or legislated. We have to just make different choices and demand better. And I also think that there are some apps out there you can buy and just scan food right in the food aisle, and it'll tell you the level of processing. It'll tell you if it's minimally processed, processed versus ultra processed. And it's based on this whole Nova system by a Brazilian scientist came up with this rating method, which is totally different than looking at foods in terms of the amount of fat or calories or sodium. Or it's really about the quality of the food from a processing standpoint. I've seen at least 3 or 4 different apps that you can just bar scan different foods. That's a nice shortcut.
Yes, that is a great shortcut. I'm gonna be looking those up. That's so helpful. And yeah, I mean, I think this idea that you've introduced to me, I'd never heard of this. Like we hear processed foods are bad, but you're so right. Like if I think about canning as a process, which my grandma used to do with things that she grew in her garden, that's like the most kind of stripped back chemical free thing, but it is a process that's happening to those vegetables.
Think of milk, think of milled flour, like whole wheat bread, that's processed. Even oatmeal, you know, it's processed. I think we just need to look more at the ingredient lists. If we don't recognize it, probably not good. I don't even think you need a bar scanner for that.
Right. I'm gonna do both. I'm gonna be looking at the labels more, and I'm gonna get one of these apps just to check, and see kind of where they are. And I like the idea of stepping away. I think a lot of us are kind of sick of the whole looking at calorie, and there was that whole age of like zero trans fats. Well, that doesn't actually mean it's good for you. And so
Oh, Emily, can I tell you the trajectory as a dietitian? Because I've been a dietitian for quite a while.
please tell me.
Okay, so when I started, it was like oat bran, everything, oat bran potato chips. Oat bran lowers cholesterol. So it's crazy. And also, it was the whole era where it doesn't matter how much sugar a food has as long as it's no fat. So it was like all these fat free, high sugar products out there and so many mixed messages. During that period, with the high sugar, no fat, Americans got a lot more obese. And obviously, the pendulum swings back, and now we're talking about healthy fats. There's over a period of decades, there's been so much information that's been just a little too extreme. And obviously, once the food companies get a hold of it, then you see fat free everywhere. Even eggs, the perfect protein, eggs. Unless you have like a real situation that is mandated by a doctor, eggs are like a perfect protein and loaded with good vitamins and B vitamins and carotenes. It's like eggs are not the villain. The other foods we eat are the villain. And there's more and more studies too that dietary cholesterol doesn't necessarily equate to serum cholesterol. Shellfish, for example, very high in cholesterol, but it doesn't make our blood cholesterol high. And that's like one of these myths people still like, they're like, no, I can't have shrimp. I have high cholesterol. I'm like, well, shrimp is almost fat free. And the cholesterol that you're going to get from shrimp, it's a good source of protein. It doesn't have a lot of fat. And the cholesterol that's in it is not going to adversely affect your blood cholesterol. I think we drilled in so many messages over the years that even kind of turning them back is a process.
Well said. That's so true. I guess the marketing advertising machine, like I've heard that about shrimp. I've heard that about eggs, cholesterol, bad for your cholesterol. It's not even the whole, it's one piece of the puzzle anyway. And sometimes just straight up misinformation. Sometimes we learn new things and the science evolves, but sometimes it was never actually true in the first place. That's another kind of scary thought. I'm sure you've seen a lot. And yeah, Is it frustrating for you who actually knows what's going on when you see these things? Do you just feel like, "Oh my gosh, no?"
Yeah, but it's always an opportunity. And, people are always at different levels for diet, like food. It's very personal and can be very emotional. And a lot of people feel very ingrained. Like at my restaurant, I know when somebody walks through the door, whether they're in a good mood, they want to celebrate, whether the food matters or doesn't matter. Like there's so much emotion going on about, I don't know particularly what's going on in their life, but I can get a vibe off of them, right? And whether they're open to experiment with new foods, whether they just want to come down, sit down, and have some comfort foods, but it's very ingrained. Eating is emotional. Nutrition information gets very set into someone's pattern and they get very emotional about it because I've been doing this all these years. It must be correct. So I feel sometimes I'm willing to give people information. People aren't always ready to hear it because it's just one of those things like I couldn't have been doing this wrong for all these years. Do you know what I'm saying? So
Yes, I
it's
do.
I think it's all about approach, you know, how things are said, providing people with evidence, or leaving it alone if they're not ready. It's like kind of like mentoring. You got to be ready to be mentored, right? And that's what it is. I mean, some people are really at a point that they really want change and they want good information. My doctor told me this. Well, do you know that most doctors have only had an elective nutrition course? So if your doctor is prescribing a specific type of diet, you should follow it because your doctor, if he's telling you to follow cardiac diet or something for kidney disease or whatever, you should absolutely follow what they're telling you to do. But within that scope, you should let a nutritionist or a trained professional assist you with those guidelines. I taught nutrition at Cornell Medical College years ago. It was an elective. Recently at my restaurant, the chief resident came in. He wanted to have a dinner with all the residents. So I asked him, is nutrition still an elective? And he said, "Oh, yeah." So this is like more than 20 years later. It's in this time where nutrition is such a key component to treating disease and preventing disease. It's still an elective in most medical colleges.
Wow. People do not know that. I didn't know that.
So it's a bunch of factors. People do need better nutrition information. Some people really need to see a nutritionist. Insurance is a problem in many cases. And also timing, a lot of times, like a nutrition counseling session will be recommended to someone as they're laying in a hospital bed. That might not be the best timing to catch someone to provide nutrition counseling, but it may be the only opportunity that you have. So I think the more we speak, and thank you very much for today, about diet and nutrition and give good information to people, it's just very important because there's a lot of bad information out there.
Yes. Thank you for all of the work that you're doing here, sharing with us, but writing articles and having your restaurant and consulting and everything that you're doing to share this information that we need because you're right, it's complicated, right? It's complicated not just in what information is true, but where we find that information, the source we get it from, at what point in our lives. As you said, food becomes such a part of our identity and our culture and our traditions and our relationships and our social lives. I really appreciate you spreading the word in a way that, I mean, I could listen to you forever. I love your approach, the combination, the science, but also the joy.
I absolutely love what I do, and spreading good information through good food, I think it's just a treat for me. I just love it. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Of course. And for everybody listening who wants to one day eat at your restaurant, but even before that, learn more from you, connect with you, where is the best place for people to find you?
LauraPensiero.com.
Awesome. And we will make sure that's linked in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, Laura. This has been amazing. I've learned so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Now I want to hear what you learned. DM me on Instagram at Curious Life of a Child-Free Woman or leave a review with your top takeaway. These ratings really do make a difference. If you're not a member of the Curious Life Club yet, you are invited. Visit CuriousLifeOfAChildFreeWoman.com to join the conversation, share suggestions, and be first to know the next curious topic. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.